Me that we are live. Everything is good on that side of things. Welcome, everybody. So I'll go ahead and get started with a couple of introductions and some small housekeeping items. Thank you to everyone who is joining us on Zoom for the Zoom room. Thanks for registering in advance. And thank you to everyone who is joining on YouTube Live. Both of these audiences are important. Both of you will be involved in the chat, hopefully. Please use the chat function as much as possible. We have a Race to Zero Waste staff member over on YouTube to help out, and we have a Race to Zero Waste staff member here in the chat in Zoom to help out. So please use that function, ask questions, get involved in the conversation. That's what we're here for. Well, this is part of our Zero Waste Month interview series. So we've been doing this for a few years now, and this is our third interview this month. We are focusing on e-waste. And so if you missed the greenwashing interview, that one is already on YouTube, available to watch right now. And the first interview we did at the National Zero Waste Conference, a virtual event put on by Zero Waste USA. And we talked about zero waste initiatives specifically in South Florida. So that's a really interesting, like very localized conversation that you might get inspired from. Look for that on our YouTube channel a little bit later, as the recording will be available in the future. And next week, we will be talking about sustainable farming, climate change, and zero waste, climate justice and environmental justice, how all of those kind of come together as a nexus. So look forward to that. And then on the 31st, which is the last Thursday of the month, we'll be talking about incineration. So this is a big issue in waste management, in zero waste. We know that the Zero Waste International Alliance definition of zero waste says that without burning is the way to go. So that's as an affiliate of the Zero Waste International Alliance, ZWIA. Race to Zero Waste conforms to that definition of zero waste. It's the peer-reviewed definition of zero waste, and that is what we are going for. So no burning, no discharges to land, water, or air, and that is part of what we're going to be talking about today with this big issue of e-waste. So once again, thank you to our audience members who are here currently and in the future as we go through this conversation. And I'm very pleased to introduce you all to our speakers today. So we have two wonderful experts that we're very excited to hear from, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves first. So Jim, would you like to go first?
Sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Jim Puckett. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Basel Action Network. And we love the acronym BAN. We like to ban a lot of things, like the International Trade in Waste. But the word Basel comes from a Swiss city where a treaty was signed. We'll talk about that treaty today. But the Basel Action Network, some years back in 2001, more or less, discovered that a lot of our electronic waste was not being recycled really. It was being exported and treated in really very primitive fashion abroad. So that's when we first got really involved and did some documentaries on that. And since then, I've been immersed in electronic waste.
Yeah, and we're really interested to hear the work that Ben has been doing and your work specifically on this issue. Kathy, go ahead and introduce yourself too.
My name is Kathy Rico. I work with Zero Waste Marine as a senior planner, and there I oversee the household hazardous waste programs. So one of the programs that we have is actually one of the household hazardous waste facilities, which is located in San Rafael, California. And there we do accept electronics. I actually work at that facility for about 11 years, so I'm very familiar with the ins and outs of electronic waste, as well as the challenges that, we face in the daily operations of that facility. So I'm very excited to talk to all of you about some of the solutions and some of the challenges as well. And thank you for the invitation.
All right, thank you both. I'm going to, here we go. Now we're all spotlighted. Perfect. Okay, so I just want to start out with defining maybe this e-waste issue. We'll get started that way, just for any audience members who are unsure, or maybe like, why is this a big deal? Why is this something that's so important for us to tackle, especially from the zero waste perspective? Kathy, would you like to answer first?
Yeah, well, one of the challenges that we see mainly is the diversity of electronics that are being generated pretty much every day, every week. And when it comes to the waste management aspect, it's very difficult to handle some of these materials. Sometimes because recyclers are not ready to handle some of these new technologies that are being produced. Sometimes the users don't know what to do with some of these products. And sometimes some of these products, for example, when we talk about vape pens, those are sometimes very complicated to handle because some of them can come apart. So those, if you can remove the batteries or if there are other devices that you can actually recycle, then it's easier to handle. But some of those, you cannot actually break them apart. And again, in the case of the vape pens, some of them have controlled substances like THC, or we have nicotine. So on that end, we're talking about something that is very toxic, and it's again complicated to handle in that situation. And we see a lot of products that come with embedded batteries. So also when it comes to recycling, some recyclers could have the technology to handle those type of items, but some of them can't. So it makes it very it's very expensive to dispose of those, and sometimes they have to end up tossed in the landfill because sometimes there's just no other alternatives than that. I think that Jim can speak more from the other perspective of, how all this is generated in other countries and all of that. But I leave it up to you.
Yeah, well, the scope of what we're talking about, just to be clear with everyone, anything that has a current going through it to make it function, whether from a battery or for plugging it into the wall. And that is a lot of things now. Some of them are embedded devices in furniture and clothing nowadays. The so-called Internet of Things has put circuitry everywhere. And we're just talking about a lot of materials, the fastest growing waste stream on the planet. We're already making 60 million metric tons per year of this material. That's 7.6 kilograms per person, even counting developing countries in that figure. That's a lot of stuff to be producing. And it would just be a big nuisance if it weren't for the fact that it's toxic. It still is toxic. So the manufacturers have not taken the responsibility. We believe they can, and I've been told even by themselves that they can make toxic-free computers and toxic-free phones. They just haven't been whipped hard enough to do it because they have all the alternative technologies and materials. So this is toxic waste when it becomes a waste, and that is largely because of the organic compounds in it, as well as the heavy metals. Some of the rare earth metals, we're not so sure how toxic they are still. But, and then when it's mismanaged, which is unfortunately more than the norm, the vast majority is mismanaged. It can be burned or dumped, and this stuff becomes even more hazardous. So you have a hazardous waste problem that's growing dramatically, that's in our hands, meaning that we can take some responsibility for it, at least what happens to it in the next stage after we get rid of it. So we have an opportunity to really do something about it, but it is a very large, scary problem.
Definitely.
I would like to add to what Jim said, in terms of the generation, and also to what was posted in the chat from Hayden about the 7.6 kilogram per person, that is generating in terms of electronics. So what we're seeing now is that electronics is not as heavier as they used to be. So we don't have so much of the CRTs, like big computer screens or TVs. So in terms of weight, their weight has decreased, but in terms of the quantity, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's decreasing. As Jean mentioned, I actually think, and as we're seeing the 7.6 kilogram per person, it's increasing because now we have it in so many different ways, like headphones, cell phones, tablets. I mean, you name it, right? Like electronics are all over, medical devices. So I think that aspect is also very important to keep in mind, that devices are also becoming lighter and lighter, but that doesn't mean that we're making less waste. I think that is kind of like the opposite. Like we depend so much on these devices that we are generating even more waste.
Exactly. And as Kathy was starting to talk about, this material was never designed to be recycled. So it's not designed for end of life. That's the last thing they think about when they're creating these products. It's basically designed for the dump. The material, they would love to see you buy a new one as soon as possible, the manufacturers, and that's by design. So we have seen a steady mountain growing, not just because of innovation, but because the mindset now is, well, let's just, ride that engine of innovation, but not even think about product longevity, upgrading these products, reusing them, recycling them. Just tell the public, don't worry, it's going to be recycled, and then sell a new one as quickly as possible. And I'm here to tell you, when somebody says, don't worry, we're going to recycle it, that's when you just start worrying. Because what I've seen around the world, recycling can be a very disastrous enterprise.
And I definitely want to get into what you've seen around the world. I think that's going to be a really interesting perspective. But before we get into that, I will just want to be clear about what the hazardous materials are and what the hazards are to the earth and to human health. So we've talked about the production of e-waste, the Internet of Things, like how this is continuously increasing, even though our electronics seem to be getting lighter. What I want to get into a little bit now is just, what are the hazards exactly? What's going on with the earth and what's going on with our bodies as we create these mountains and mountains of e-waste?
Sure, I'll give it a start, and then Kathy can take over. From what we have learned from all of these sites that we've been chasing around the world, the biggest hazards are impacting the workers in these false recycling operations, or very dangerous recycling operations. Secondarily, it'll be the community members. And the third level is, of course, the general environment and wildlife, et cetera, air pollution all over. But the front line that really gets hammered are the workers in these bogus recycling facilities, informal sector recycling facilities. And the hazards that are in there to harm are the metals, primarily lead, that is still in solders. It's still proliferating a lot of this equipment, even in some of the plastic insulation. There's lead as an additive, and there's other metals as well, like cadmium, and then mercury. So a lot of the material that's being handled right now are the flat screens that were from the age when we had backlight mercury lamps. And that's what I've seen so often, as people are banging those apart to try to get the metals out of them. And those mercury lamps are shattering, and the mercury is going right into their faces. But in terms of the historic populations in Ghana and in Guiyu, China, the areas that have been really hammered, we're looking at documented lead impacting children in the community, harming their brain development, their nervous system development. In Ghana, where they did so much burning, they found the highest levels of brominated dioxins anywhere on the planet, and those are going into the food chain via chickens in the slums, et cetera. So it's a lot of real serious toxicity, a lot of it long-term impacts like carcinogenicity, etc. But this is what's coming out every day from this stream because it is not being properly managed. And stream is it's not the right word for what we're really talking about. It's more of a tsunami of what we're producing.
To complement Jim's feedback around your question, I think that we also need to look at the aspect from the extraction of those heavy metals, and that usually happen in third world countries where environmental regulations are now very strict, and governments, give a priority to this type of business because it's convenient for those governments, for the economy. And also, we see, like, I don't know, even when I have been at recycling facilities, as you mentioned, Jim, sometimes workers don't really understand the risk that they are being exposed, Sometimes when they're breaking some of these materials to recycle them, so there's all like the shredding of some of these materials, is the small particles also that people, inhale to that, and it could go to the skin, even though you're wearing like basic PPE. And I mean, in third world countries, people are doing this in a very informal way because it's the way that they believe that they can make a living. But, you can see them like barefoot, or you can see children handling this type of heavy metals, burning them, using also other very like toxic chemicals, or very chemicals that, like acids that can be really harmful for your skin, and they don't have any type of like gloves or, glasses that will protect their eyes. And so it seems like, the people who are often handling this type of materials are people who, they don't have the opportunity maybe to go to school, or that they don't have the resources to educate themselves. And they just do it because they are trying to survive, like any of us. And I think that something that is also very important for people to know is that when we think about hazardous, and I really like the fact that you are asking us, well, what is the thing about hazardous waste? So we usually have hazardous materials and we have hazardous waste. And the important is the word hazardous, because we try to think like, because something is on the shelf of a store, that is safe. So this doesn't only happen to electronics, but with other household items that are also, risky for our health. So the main thing about something that is hazardous is that, it puts our life, our health, the environment in a situation that will affect our health, and it's just risky, right? Like it could affect us in different ways, to going into the water, which happens often with electronics that are dumped outside, or if they are burned, or like the soil then is not fertile anymore because now we have all these heavy chemicals, and it goes into underground, and then that's the water that many communities are going to use for drinking water. And that's water that is not really easy to treat when it's already in the groundwater. So these are really important issues that we really need to think of, like it's just not about buying a device and it's something that is fun, but like the responsibility that we have behind when we are buying something, when we are acquiring something, like it's something that is really impacting people globally. So again, I just want to make sure that people understand that if we see something on a shelf, doesn't mean that it is safe. But really, that's what is important to read at labels. Like if it's hazardous, it is hazardous. There's something that makes it either toxic, or irritates the skin or it's gonna react. So there are certain characteristics for a material to be hazardous. And then it becomes a waste when we just don't need it anymore, right? But many of these devices can be also be repaired and can be reused again.
Yeah, and hopefully that's what our audience is already doing. If you're here for Zero Waste Month, hopefully you've been following the zero waste hierarchy and you know that reducing is the biggest thing. Reusing, repairing, the R's that Kathy just mentioned, those are so important, including with our electronic devices, appliances, all the things that plug into a wall and have some kind of cable connection. Jim, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm good.
Okay, great. So now that we've talked a little bit about what e-waste is, what the hazards are, let's get into maybe some of the things that we see as things that are helpful in getting this mountain of e-waste reduced a bit. So Jim, do you want to talk about some of the work that BAN is doing related to reducing e-waste or protecting frontline communities?
Well, we're spending most of our time still, unfortunately, trying to stop the export of this material. Still far too often the front lines of this problem are either in the manufacturing or the extraction, so they're in the developing world, or they're dealing with the waste side of it, and they're still in the developing world. So the life cycle of electronics is sad in that when it's really safe and it's putting out very few externalities or toxic problems. So I'm sitting in front of my laptop here. I get a little bit of off-gassing of emissions of volatile organic compounds and such, but the real brunt is handled disproportionately by those in developing countries in the front part of the life cycle production, and then very conveniently we export it back to Asia, etc., Africa, where it's dealt with when it's also really hazardous, which we're breaking the materials apart, and those hazards are coming out, therefore, either through the use of heat and smelting or just pulverizing things and breathing it, letting it leach into the groundwater, using chemical baths like acids to strip the stuff out and creating toxic gases, etc. So this is all that I've seen, and we're still, unfortunately, at this moment, chasing this stuff primarily out of the United States. So when you see these companies that put up a sign saying, I'm an electronics recycler, that means I'm a good guy, I'm wearing angels, be really cautious about that. So many of them just pack and ship into intermodal containers and away it goes. And every time we think we get a jump on it, we're seeing they found another way. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole. They found another place, another way. And I'm here to tell you right now, we have just discovered a new massive flow going through Los Angeles and Long Beach using false tariff codes going to Malaysia primarily Port Klang. And there you will see all these little facilities that pop up using immigrant labor, primarily illegal labor, oftentimes in that part of the world from Burma or Bangladesh. And they're exploiting those people right left and center. They live right on the property in cardboard boxes, and they're breathing in all this material, whether from the fumes or what have you. So it's really still a crisis, and that is where we've put most of our energy. And we have tried really hard to get the US to ratify the Basel Convention to get some controls on this that the rest of the world has. And in lieu of that, we've created a certification of the good recyclers that really want to step up and behave as if the United States had ratified the Basel Convention and were not exporting this stuff to developing countries, because that would be illegal if they were part of this treaty. So we created a certification called e-Stewards, which does that, and we police it really well with unannounced inspections and using GPS trackers, etc. But that back end work is really important, we believe, to shine a spotlight for people on why we need the front end work of reducing e-waste, which is what you asked me about initially. But until people see how horrific it really is, We have a hard time believing we're going to see too much change on this really serious problem. But we do have ideas on how that should happen, starting with pressing the manufacturers to first and foremost get the toxics out, and also get those things out of the materials that becomes really toxic when burned, because things will burn in the developing world. And that's things that we create, dioxins, etc., halogenated plastics, etc. So there's a long list of things we can do. I'll start with that one. I've talked a long time here, so I'll pass it over to Kathy.
Thank you, Jim. So, Hayden, you were asking more about the definition of what is electronic waste. So I'm just kind of gonna go directly from what the Department of Toxic Substances Control defines it. So it says, is any unwanted electronic device or cathode ray tube. So those are the old TVs that we used to see, right? And they're usually considered hazardous because, as Jen mentioned it, they have lead or mercury. And one of the most common items that, DTSC describes as electronic waste are old televisions, LCD screens, we have laptops, computer monitors, printers, VCRs, portable DVD players, cell phones, printers, radio. However, the list is long, and that has been one of the big issues, that there's not really a clear definition of what electronic waste is. So it also becomes very challenging sometimes to recycle some of these products because the recyclers don't even know sometimes if they can take it or not, if it's something that is considered electronic waste, or again, even if it's considered an electronic waste, they just don't have the technology to process some of these materials. So something that is also important to mention is that electronic waste is what we also know as universal waste. And what does that mean? That these are items that we usually use on our daily life. And that's why it's less regulated than other hazardous waste that are more stringent regulated, because it's something that we can just find at our home and our office. And these are more like consumer products that people can easily access online or at a store. So I don't know if that answered your question in terms of what is e-waste.
No, I think that's great. And I think both of you have mentioned two key components for addressing this issue. One of them would be on the manufacturer side, the producers of our electronic devices. And then the other is on the regulatory side, regulations that help reduce or limit the amount of toxins that are in our products, and also regulate how producers are taking these back or creating them in a way that they can be easily broken apart, this kind of modular design. So let's kind of get into the producer side of things, and then maybe link that with the extended producer responsibility type of legislation that is becoming more common and has taken place 2018 maybe is when it started in Europe. So I would love to talk about those two items. What can producers do, or what are they doing? Hopefully the right way. Maybe some of them are doing some good things to reduce this burden of e-waste on especially developing countries.
Yeah, so producer responsibility, it's kind of a mixed story in my view. It was a great concept because the manufacturers did finally say, okay, we're part of the problem. Therefore, we share the solution, we share the burden, we should be involved. And they took financial responsibility after the laws required them to do so, but they accepted that. The downside of it, particularly in the United States, is that it allowed things to be managed, but in the United States, we don't have the ability to have states, which is where these EPR laws were developed, not at the federal level, but we're not allowing states to control export in our federal constitution. So the Commerce Clause doesn't allow states to do anything to control exports. So we had a great way of keeping things out of the landfill, but then that just actually incentivized more export. So what happened was we started moving things from landfill to container ships going offshore with EPR, with electronics. And sadly, we're still dealing with that because the federal government hasn't either ratified the Basel Convention or created a national EPR program. So everything's at the state level, and there's no ability for states to forbid the export of this material once you've moved it out of landfills. So this has been a challenge for us. The other problem with EPR is that it really kind of gives a monopoly to the producers on the entire life cycle of a product. So they can start dictating how things get managed at end of life because they totally control it. That's the kind of the trade-off with you take responsibility, but you get to control what happens to it after end of life, these products. And so they come up with some really not so brilliant things, like they don't really want to reuse them. They created things where it's impossible to reuse toner cartridges or refill them and that sort of thing, because the manufacturers, they have total say over what happens. So innovative recycling and zero waste concepts are not to be had from the public or for entrepreneurs, but are controlled by the largest companies, the ones making the electronics to begin with. So EPR has also failed in that it was originally meant to drive green design. So the thought was that the manufacturers have to take responsibility for their own stuff. They will have an incentive then to not have it be such a liability at end of life. But because the EPR doesn't really come back to their own brand, but is a collective responsibility, nobody had an incentive really to jump ahead of the other companies and come up with something that was greener to save them money. Since they're all collectively grabbing all this waste at the same time, it's failed to be a driver for individual brands to start designing their products to be more green and toxic free, for example. So EPR is a mixed bag, but it did have the impact of making the whole world realize, wow, the people that manufacture this stuff are responsible for it even after the consumers have had it in their hands. And that was really revolutionary.
Yeah, hopefully we can continue to push that forward. That's what we'd really like to see. Kathy, did you want to contribute to this question?
Yeah, I think that EPR has been a great tool in the sense that it's actually making all of us more aware that we all have a responsibility on the end of life of products. I don't think that it only is the responsibility of the producer, but also of the consumer. And I think that, as consumers, when we acquire something, we try to think like we should not pay for the disposal of that. And for me, that is a very interesting concept because, we are willing to pay for something, but we're not willing to take care of how the end of life of that product is. To me, it's like we all have a responsibility on that. And as Jim mentioned it, I think that we need to go back to one of the main goals of EPR, which is how manufacturers create products that are more environmentally friendly to dispose of or to use. Because right now, how I see it is that the majority of bills that are being passed for EPR programs is more towards saving costs to government. Which, from a perspective, it seems like we are helping consumers to save money, but I mean, the reality is the consumer is also paying a percentage for those programs that are being created to dispose of those products responsibly. And we are also forgetting the reuse part of it, which I think that because as Jean mentioned it, government's priorities are economic priorities, but when we really look in a bigger picture, I think that if we start from creating a product that is safer for the environment and for consumers, and that it can be either reused or recycled, then it creates other opportunities to create markets to make money. And then we are actually paying less money in healthcare, in pollution, in inequality. But again, there are always parties who are kind of like interested in using these opportunities to benefit from it. So I think that we need to step up the game when it comes to EPR, that it should not be just the fact of creating programs that, yes, are saving money to governments, but it has to come back to the roots of what it really is.
Yeah, I think those are good points. Like the economic question, I think is important for, businesses, for governments, even for consumers. Like you said, like consumers may not want to pay for the eventual disposal, but maybe this is something that we need to start thinking of. It's part of the conversation that we've also had around fast fashion, right? Like we are paying for quality pieces that are going to be with us for a long time, and then hopefully paying for their appropriate disposal without affecting other communities that aren't necessarily ours on down the line. So it's not just the electronic waste side of things, right? These principles apply to so many of the products that we buy. And I think that's, an important thing to keep in mind in the concept of zero waste in general.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
and also something that I see that happens very common is that when a company comes with these great ideas in terms of products, which I'm not against that, we all need that, like in medicine, technology is great to have devices and things like that. Like it's very positive in many ways. However, I think that there's never that connection to talk with the recyclers, to talk with the people to talk to. And they can create better products. It's just like that conversation. I mean, I only have had 2 companies. We are in the Bay Area, and we had a lady who runs a makeup company, and she came and talked to us to tell us, okay, tell us what we can really recycle. And it was great. Like those conversations, I think that those are the type of conversations that when manufacturers are thinking about creating these products, they should involve people like us in those conversations of creating products.
Absolutely. Jim, I saw you wanted to say something.
Oh, there's so many things. I think one of the things I've learned over these years I've been working on this is recycling is really not the goal. Recycling is this kind of the last resort, right? And when you see this mass consumption going on and people just say, oh, don't worry, we're going to recycle it all, so therefore we can just mass produce single-use this and single-use that, you really run up against the limits of recycling really quickly. Recycling can only do so much. And for some materials, we would argue it doesn't really work at all. And plastics would be one of those. Now that I've done a deep dive into plastic the last few years, I'm realizing it's not really a circular material. So the solutions lie elsewhere in having alternative materials, but largely having mechanisms that incentivize longevity of products. Some of that is psychological. I don't know. We want to incentivize people with psychological means, but in the old days, people were very happy to keep their clothing and dresses for many years, their appliances for many years. This mentality of I'm going to go buy something new at the shops and throw out my old tomorrow it's not something that's really innately a human thing. We don't have to be that way. And so what can we do on a capitalist system without command and controlling people to promote longevity of products and not this mentality that the manufacturer is going to sell you a new one tomorrow, and then we'll put a Band-Aid approach of recycling on it. And one of the techniques that has been raised after they tried EPR and that didn't really work for incentivizing green design is to have a lease-based economy, more of a shared economy where you're leasing all your services, you're leasing your computer, you're leasing your carpets, you're leasing your phone. And the manufacturer then is the lessor, has to have all the problems inherent with what they've produced, including toxicity. They have to deal with it because they're getting it back at end of life. And they're always getting it back directly to them, not to a landfill or an incinerator somewhere, but they have to take physical responsibility, not just fiscal responsibility for it. So they go, oh, wow, we have to design this toxic free. We have to make sure it's really long lived, that it looks really good so people want to keep it for a long time. And it's upgradable so we can innovate and have new innovations in it. But this will be the incentive for them to be good lessors and to make money at it. So this is a concept that's starting to take off all over, and more the younger generation, I think, is not believing they have to own everything, that they're actually feel liberated not to have to own everything. And it does provide that incentive in a capitalist world to not constantly sell you something that you have to then get rid of tomorrow. So this is a hopeful way forward, I think, is explore more options like that. If you're a consumer, look for ways to lease your services, look into those lessors, see what they have on the terms of environmental programs and sustainability, long life, what they project for how they're going to get rid of their own material and that sort of thing, because I do think that's a way forward.
I think those are great points. And just leading off of what you have said, what are some ways that consumers and us as audience members can look for, the best options? So we've already mentioned like leasing as one option. I know of a couple, like I buy, for example, the computer that I have is secondhand, so I bought it refurbished. That's an option for some of
Absolutely.
our electronic devices. And I know that Fairphone is one that has
Yeah.
been talked about a lot. I don't have personal experience with it, but that's one where, they're touting that they, source their materials in the most fair way possible, sort of like fair trade coffee kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and that they're modular design, so you can upgrade your camera on your phone only if you want, which I think modular design is one way to go in the future too. So would love to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's precious few, though the Fairphone's a really great model, and I hope it succeeds because it's not going to change the world all by itself, but as a model, it might. And it really is impressive what they've done already. I kept waiting for it to be sold in the United States, and now I've heard it is sold in the United States, so I don't have an excuse anymore. I got to go out and buy one. But the other thing I was going to say is
But only when it's time to replace your current phone.
Yeah, exactly. So there's precious few resources and report carding on how green is any electronic device. But there is at least one that I know of that's still going, EPEAT, EPEAT. It was designed originally for government procurement to get the most green products in the hands of the government. And it's still going, and it has a lot of different, I think, gold, silver, bronze ratings on all kinds of different electronic equipment. So check that out. Look for EPEAT as a way when you're ready to get your next whatever, to find really the platinum level of being both energy efficient and toxic free and that sort of thing.
That's cool. I hadn't heard of that one yet. Kathy, did you have any additions?
Well, we have learned a little bit from Sonoma County, and this doesn't only come to electronics, but like repair fairs. It's a concept that, more like local people are enjoying, and this comes again not only from electronics, but like bicycles or like clothing. It's just this idea of repairing. I am originally from Colombia, and I remember, when I was a kid, just having to bring my shoes to the repair store, and then they will, I mean, I still do that. Like I have shoes for, I don't know, maybe like even 15 years. But, when it comes to electronics, I think that really looking at devices that people can easily upgrade at home, or if they want to take it into a repair place. And nowadays we find so many of those stores, like local stores. Here, probably I mean, I live again close to San Francisco, and there's one. I can even walk from my place to one of these places. So, and I like what you mentioned, refurbish. We do work with a local company where we send some of the electronic waste that we collect at the household hazardous waste facility, and we have contracted with them because that's one of the main goals that we want them to do. We want them to refurbish, and then we want people within our community to be able to use some of these, reuse some of these devices. And like Jim said, I really think that we've been sold in this idea that recycling is best, but I do really believe reuse is much better than recycling, and that there are ways to create a new economy around that. It's just that because of capitalism is more about selling the amounts of products, but I think that we really have to start changing the direction of our economy in certain aspects that we do business around.
Yeah, and on the issue of repair, I want to put in a plug for those that don't know, company iFixit down in San Luis Obispo. They're amazing in that they made these unintimidating repair manuals where you can repair your own electronics, believe it or not. And I've done it, and I'm not some genius. And they're just such good step-by-step guides, and then they make their money just by selling you the parts. If you want to buy the parts from them, they do that. But it's amazing how much you can do yourself. One of the problems with repair in this country, of course, is that labor is so expensive, much more so than countries like Colombia. So we've lost a lot of repair shops and everything, but don't be intimidated. Some of these repairs only take like 45 minutes, and they give you the tools to do it, and they sell you the parts and the way you go, and it's kind of fun to figure it out. If you're one of those kind of persons that likes to put together IKEA products or something, it's a step-by-step guide, and it's kind of fun. So try that out. So many people have repaired their own equipment.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think of it, I did like CPR training. And so they tell you like to not be afraid because the person is already like, the worst off that they can get. And I feel like that sometimes with some, electronic devices, we might feel really
Yeah.
afraid to break it. But like if it's already broken,
Already broken, yeah.
just give it a try, see if you can fix it. And it feels really empowering. I'll second that because I fixed a standing fan that we have at our house. I took it apart and like cleaned it up and put it back together, and it worked, and it felt amazing. I'll just put a plug in for repairing things. And so I love that we've gotten to the repair aspect because part of the conversation that has come up in the chat too is about right to repair laws. I love that you talked about iFixit. I was going to mention them if you hadn't. And repair clinics or fix-it clinics are a great way to get repairs done. Let's talk about right to repair. Like, what are some of the things that we're seeing in development with legislation around repair?
Yeah, I'm not as up on it as some people are, but I've been really gratified to see that, especially in Europe, the laws are coming on board to force manufacturers to provide the tools. And when I say tools, sometimes they're proprietary and they need to be provided, but also just the specifications, what went into the products, all the information you would need as a repair facility. And they're democratizing that. They're not keeping it proprietary. So this is now by law that you have to allow for that. And we used to have laws like that a long time ago, that forced manufacturers to keep spare parts. And so the idea was that you'd always repair things. But more and more, the mentality has gotten away from that idea, and people just feel like something's broken, it's ready to be junked. And that's so unfortunate. Because like Kathy says, there's a whole economy to be based around repairing and keeping things going.
Yeah, I agree with Jem. I think that one of the biggest challenges in this country is the cost of labor. So it's very difficult for some of these businesses to stay in business. And I think that I see, as Jim mentioned it, that Europeans are more interested in passing regulations like that because it's more of the protection of the consumers too, and because of the European Union, right? So it's more like powerful, I think, them as different nations are on the same page. However, I think that this is where we, the United States as a country, have such a big responsibility because many people copy a lot of what we do here. And we have this economy that is based a lot on disposing things and throwing away things that our younger generations are really attached to those kind of things. And we start giving younger people electronics even at very young ages, like I actually see younger people using more of those devices. So I think that even from that perspective, it's becoming a big issue because it's all about owning something and throwing something away, not so much about, what is behind all of these devices, what are other options that I have, because then now it's so part of the social culture on like people are defined so much through these material things. So, it's like a whole component on this, like from the social aspect, the economic aspect. So yeah, I think that that's a really challenging barrier that we have to face, and I don't really know what the solution is, but I think that what is important is that I always tell people I don't feel like to make change, like we have to go out there in the world and become a president or a politician. I mean, we can start at home, and if that's something that makes me feel good, maybe I can inspire my neighbor, or I can do, or my cousin or a relative. And if I'm doing something good, that's the best start that I can do. We don't have to do extraordinary things to do something a little good.
Yeah, and that's definitely, part of the purpose of Zero Waste Month. So you've just said it, like we're all trying to do a little bit better on our journey towards zero waste. And so in these last few minutes that we have of the interview today, I want to get into a little bit of like what we can look for as we're, starting to replace our electronic devices. So let's say now it's time for me to get a new phone. I'm sold on Fairphone. I've saved up for it. I'm going to get it. But what do I do with my old phone now? So how can I look for the right place to send it that's really being responsible with the e-waste that it receives? Because, obviously I don't want to put it in my normal trash bin. I'm not going to send it to the landfill. I want to find a really good recycling drop-off point. What are some things that I can look for to find the right one?
Well, that's one thing we have worked on. It might sound self-serving, of course, but we did create a certification program for ethical recyclers, and it's called eStewards, E-Stewards. You can go to the website and find the one closest to you. They do work on the principle of the waste management hierarchy, so they do emphasize reuse. And right now, that is the more economic thing anyway. It's almost every recycler is realizing they can make more money refurbishing and reusing and then harvesting parts than they can shredding it all and then trying to isolate all the different fractions. So they're about that, and they're all a little bit different, but check those folks out. And apart from that, try to keep things going, try to fix it before you reach that point. And even if you don't need it, you can perhaps repair it, have it repaired. And a lot of phones and such that are still in a good condition can be sold online at different facilities. So try to get it back in the marketplace if you can.
I think that people need to look for, well, I'm guessing that we're having people listening through the entire country, hopefully. So I think that always is helpful to look for your household hazardous waste program where you are. So you can go to a household hazardous waste facility. If there's something that can be fixed and repaired, then maybe look for a local repair shop. If you don't want to do it, they can do it. You can pay, a very small amount to be fixed. We always have relatives or the friend of a kid who died to have that old cell phone so they can play video games, they can chat with their friends. So there's someone who can actually use that. Also, a lot of these cell phones are using low-income programs. So I think that that could be also another alternative where we can try to put in service some of those devices if they're still usable. And yeah, I think that I love the fact that Jim has worked on creating these stewardships programs because many times we don't really know where some of these electronics are being handled and recycled or reused. So that's also a great tool for people or businesses to go to, because at least you will have that peace of mind that someone behind has done the work for you.
Well, that's exactly what we want. And I was just going to mention that e-stewards are actually on our bingo card for this week. So for each week
All
of
right.
Zero Waste Month, we have a 9-square bingo card. So if you follow us on social media, you might have seen it. And checking out the e-stewards certification and standard is one of the items on that bingo card. So now you've heard about it, you can look into it. And, if you have something that does need to be dropped off somewhere or recycled by someone, at least now you know where the best place is to drop it off. But of course, try to find another use for it first, as Kathy was mentioning,
Yeah.
right? Either repair or someone who is willing to use an older device.
Hayden, something that I want to mention before we conclude this is that I will be very aware of those e-waste events that sometimes people organize within their counties or cities, because those are usually the ones that are very shady that you don't know. So I will try to go with something that is organized by your local government, or as I said, your household hazardous waste facility, someone that has a reportable name behind, not just, like they do a lot of these events at schools, trying to collect money or with the idea that they're gonna get money. But again, many times they even leave their waste behind or they dump it somewhere else. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of those types of events as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so we are at our last minute. So just in like the last 20 seconds that you have, what is like the number one take-home message that you want to give to our audience before they go? What is that top thing that they can do or be aware of as far as e-waste, this topic this week?
Wow. Realize that what you've got in your hands is an amazing thing, but it's also a toxic time bomb. And it's an opportunity to really think about what you're going to do with it next. And don't just stick it in the shelf or the closet or whatever. Really heed what we've said today. See if you can get it reused. If not, get it recycled by an ethical recycler. But you have responsibility. You're part of the life cycle of this. And when you throw something away is a place. It's going to end up somewhere, it's going to impact somebody, and you want to make sure you don't harm somebody.
Absolutely, you don't have to do extraordinary things to make a change. And we all have a responsibility with ourselves and with everyone around us. So we have provided you with tools here. Use those tools, take advantage of that, and do the best you can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Those were amazing messages, and I appreciate Jim and Kathy so much for being on today. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove y'all spotlights. We are at the top of the hour, so if you have to go, I totally understand. I'm just going to give some closing comments really quick for our audience members to thank everyone for being here, for watching now and in the future. And remember to post with the hashtag Zero Waste Month. If you learned something today, share it on social media with your friends, with your family, let them know the things that you've learned. Maybe check out some of the documentaries that were mentioned in the chat to learn even more about these issues. Check out all the links that are in the chat as well as references. And we also have, for those of you who participate in some of our interviews and in the Zero Waste Month stuff, we have a couple of giveaways. So take a look at our Instagram and comment on there and see if you're interested in a couple of the giveaways, which are, one is a class from Green Education US. And so more details on Instagram, please follow us. We are at Race to Zero Waste on your favorite platforms. And thank you again for joining us this Thursday. We hope to see you next Thursday.